8:41 a.m., Hangar Bay 6 at Iron Gate Aviation Services. A VIP jet awaited inspection. The maintenance crew stood rigidly in formation. The air was heavy with tension. Ryan Cole, 43, a respected aircraft mechanic and single father, stood clutching his worn toolbox. CEO Helena Brooks, with the executive board, announced immediate firings for unacceptable delays in critical path operations. Ryan's name was called aloud. The charges were brief. He was ordered to surrender his badge instantly. Ryan turned toward the exit, silent and composed. No one noticed the faint, heavy thrumming that began to vibrate the distant sky. Ryan Cole lived a life defined by two precisely synchronized schedules: the intense, unforgiving clock of aviation maintenance, where a second's error meant disaster, and the rigid, loving schedule of a single father. His commitment to his son, Ben, was absolute. He regularly worked split shifts, the unforgiving solitude of the night watch followed by the rush of the early morning routine, weaving them together just to ensure he could personally drop off and pick up Ben, 9 years old, from school. That small daily moment of connection was his anchor. In the maintenance world, Ryan was legendary for his meticulousness, a trait that had saved countless hours and potentially lives. He never relied solely on the computer-generated checklist. For Ryan, the digital readout was merely a starting point. He always performed an extra visual sweep, a precise manual check of stress points, or a thermal scan on components others deemed too low priority. His internal integrity checker was always running. His motto, repeated quietly to every apprentice he mentored, was simple and unwavering. The machine doesn't lie, but the paperwork might, and your gut feeling never does. Ryan's history, a chapter he kept tightly closed, was the source of this ingrained discipline. Before Iron Gate, he had been a highly decorated Chief Petty Officer in the Naval Aviation Command, specializing in complex, high-pressure logistics for fixed-wing combat aircraft, systems far more complicated and unforgiving than the Gulfstream 5. He carried a deep institutional knowledge of legacy fuel systems, knowledge acquired in high-stress, life-or-death environments. 1 week prior, that innate expertise had screamed a warning. While inspecting the high-profile Gulfstream V jet, the very jet now sitting ready in Hangar 6 for a flight carrying high-value clients, Ryan had detected a subtle, abnormal vibration in the auxiliary fuel boost system. This system was vital for high-altitude performance and emergency fuel transfer. The vibration was fractional, nearly invisible on the main digital diagnostics, but Ryan's specialized experience in his hands, trained to feel the slightest mechanical dissonance, felt the fault. He didn't just feel it. He knew exactly what was causing it. He submitted a detailed multi-page report recommending the immediate replacement of the specialized pressure relief valve and associated mounting bracket. His supervisor, a man named Denton, was under strict, almost paralyzing pressure to clear the aircraft for the VIP flight. Denton, prioritizing schedule over safety, had overridden Ryan's warning, marking the report as non-critical and prioritizing a quick, cheap patch job that simply masked the vibration. The paperwork was clean, but the machine was wounded. Helena Brooks, Iron Gate's CEO, was not an engineer. She was a ruthless corporate strategist. The company was aggressively pursuing a massive, highly lucrative military maintenance contract, a deal that represented a quantum leap in Iron Gate's revenue. Any hiccup, delay, or negative media attention could shatter the deal and tank the stock price. Brooks measured success strictly in quarterly profits and impeccable compliance logs, not the messy, gritty reality of engineering risk. To Brooks, Ryan's detailed safety-first approach was seen as an impediment, a deliberate act of sabotage designed to delay their critical path schedule. Ryan represented the old way: slow, careful, expensive. Brooks wanted the new way: fast, compliant, profitable. Any delay, in her view, was simply unacceptable. When the Gulfstream was briefly grounded yesterday for a minor, unrelated landing gear sensor issue, Brooks seized the opportunity. Ryan, the man who dared to challenge her procedures, was scapegoated. He was chosen to be the responsible party for all recent perceived slowdowns, a sacrifice to appease the executive board and demonstrate Brooks's decisive leadership. When the public accusation came, Ryan did not argue. He knew that the debate wasn't about safety or engineering integrity. It was solely about power, and he held none. He only made a single request: permission to finish the final, critical torque check on the jet's main engine mount, a task he had started hours before and could not, in good conscience, leave undone. Helena Brooks rejected the request instantly, enjoying the public display of her authority. "You are off the clock, Mr. Cole. You are relieved of all duties. You are a liability." Ryan slowly peeled off his grease-stained work gloves, folding them meticulously. He placed his tools one by one into the old metal box, the metallic clicks echoing in the immense space. This methodical act was his quiet protest, his refusal to be rushed out the door like a common thief. It was the only dignity he had left. His younger colleagues looked away, a mix of shame and fear preventing any show of solidarity. They respected Ryan's skill, but they feared Brooks' absolute authority and the sudden insecurity of their own jobs more. Outside the main gate, Ben, 9 years old and wearing his too big school backpack, waited patiently, drawing a picture of the massive jet on a clipboard. He was used to waiting, but today the hangar seemed unnaturally silent and tense. Ryan emerged from the shadow of the colossal hangar and walked toward the gate. He paused, opened the heavy metal door, and took Ben's small hand in his own. The silence outside was louder than the noise inside. Ryan stopped just before stepping onto the street. He looked back at the massive jet, a technological marvel now carrying a hidden technical malignancy because of corporate arrogance. His eyes weren't filled with anger, but with profound, professional anxiety. He had been silenced, but the machine still had a ticking issue, and now he could do nothing about it. Ryan and Ben sat on a weathered concrete bench a few hundred yards from the iron gate fence line, the scorching sun beating down on the concrete apron. The bus stop sign was their only cover. Ryan was supposed to be dropping Ben off at school right now, a failure of his meticulously planned schedule that stung him more than the firing itself. He pulled out his old cracked phone, a relic that had survived countless drops and oil spills, and called the school. His voice was calm, professionally neutral, as he explained the sudden delay, asking Ben's teacher to expect him an hour later than usual. Ben leaned against his father's leg, watching the hurried activity inside the complex, a silent witness to the injustice. Back inside Hangar 6, the atmosphere was chaotic yet subdued. The newly assigned, much younger maintenance team, led by the nervous Denton, began the final engine test sequence. They were fast, efficient, and desperate to please Helena Brooks by clearing the jet on schedule. As the test ramped up, pushing the engines toward full thrust, the auxiliary fuel pressure gauge began its signature, light but continuous oscillation. It was the same subtle anomaly Ryan had reported. Denton looked at the gauge, then at the clock, and told himself it was just instrument flutter. A junior engineer named Chris, a sharp kid who respected Ryan, was monitoring the subsystem logs. Chris stared at his screen as the fuel pressure data spiked and dipped. He frantically cross-referenced the live telemetry with the historical archives. The resulting waveform perfectly matched the non-critical report filed by Ryan Cole last week. Ryan had been correct about the signature. Chris tried to call Denton's attention, but the maintenance warning light flickered rapidly on the main panel, signaling an imminent systems check failure in the fuel bay. Before Chris could react fully, the intense power surge of the running engines momentarily corrected the symptom, and the light blinked off entirely. The system, fighting to maintain stability, had briefly masked its own failure. The young engineer, sweating profusely, nervously reported the flicker to Helena Brooks, who was observing the final preparations from the elevated operations deck. Brooks, her eyes fixed on the remaining time, 7 minutes to planned departure, and relying purely on the current, reassuring green status on the main dashboard, dismissed the concern with aggressive certainty. "The primary indicator is nominal. We are within acceptable parameters, Chris. Do not delay the process with fractional readings." The jet's powerful main engines roared to full flight power, but beneath the thunder, a new, deeper vibration resonated through the fuselage. It wasn't the sound of healthy power. It was a rough, protesting shudder, the machine actively fighting against itself. The airframe seemed to rattle slightly, a telltale sign of destructive harmonic resonance. Suddenly, a sharp metallic ping echoed deep inside the fuel compartment, quickly masked by the sheer volume of the running engines. It was the sound of metal yielding under stress, the cheap patch failing, and the pressure relief valve, compromised by the micro-oscillation, failing completely. The failure was structural and immediate. The auxiliary fuel line now began hemorrhaging pressure. Chris, the junior engineer, saw the pressure drop off on his secondary console, a sheer vertical plunge into the red zone. He didn't hesitate this time. He screamed into the headset, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Shutdown procedure! Abort! Abort! We have a catastrophic structural failure warning on the fuel feed line. Fire risk imminent." Panic erupted. Sirens began to wail inside the hangar. The emergency crew scrambled. The entire hangar ground to a dead halt. The critical VIP flight was scheduled to depart in exactly 5 minutes. Helena Brooks, high on the operations deck, watched her perfect schedule and her massive military contract implode in a cascade of red warning lights. Realizing the immediate severity of the failure and remembering Ryan's specific professional warning, she grabbed the internal phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The gravity of nearly sending a multi-million-dollar jet and its VIP occupants to their fiery death hit her with visceral force. She was no longer a CEO. She was an executive facing criminal negligence charges. She screamed into the phone, "Get Cole back here. Where is he? I need the expert who reported this. Bring him back, whatever the cost." The security guard answered the frantic call immediately, his tone stiff and unhelpful. "Ms. Brooks, Mr. Cole was dismissed by your direct order and left the premises over 10 minutes ago. He is no longer authorized access. We cannot recall him." The finality of the guard's words was a hammer blow. A few hundred yards away, Ben tugged on Ryan's sleeve, pulling him out of a distracted silence. "Dad, the siren is screaming. You said the airplane talks when it's sick. Is it talking now?" Ryan looked back at the hangar, now filled with chaos and the rising panicked shouts of the fire crew. He squeezed Ben's hand, his expression grave. Ryan's attention snapped away from the distant hangar. The faint thrumming he had heard earlier was no longer faint. It was growing rapidly, approaching from the west. A deep, heavy, unmistakable rhythmic chop. The sound was too deep, too powerful, and too specific to be anything civilian. It wasn't the sound of a commercial jet or even a police helicopter. It was military power, and it was coming fast. High above the Iron Gate airfield, slicing through the clear, blue sky, two massive helicopters materialized in stunning, cinematic fashion. They were not the sleek civilian designs the Iron Gate crew was used to. These were matte gray, angular, and imposing. Twin Sikorsky MH-60 Seahawks, the naval warfare and logistics variants, machines built for heavy seas and combat logistics. They flew with absolute authority. Their powerful rotor wash instantly created a violent windstorm on the tarmac, a swirling vortex of dust, grit, and loose paperwork. The official Iron Gate documents, the very reports and compliance logs Helena Brooks valued, were sent spinning chaotically into the air, symbolic of the breakdown of her rigid system. In a stunning, audacious breach of civilian air traffic protocol, the lead Seahawk descended rapidly. It ignored the designated civilian landing pads, choosing the massive, open maintenance apron directly in front of Hangar 6 as its landing zone, just feet from the crippled Gulfstream V. It landed with military precision, the engines screaming an overwhelming, powerful statement of arrival. The side door slid open before the rotors had even fully stopped spinning. Two naval officers in full flight gear jumped out and moved with purpose. The senior officer, a commander with the focused intensity of a man on a mission, carried a bullhorn. His voice, amplified and absolute, cut through the engine's deafening whine, demanding immediate attention. "We are looking for Chief Petty Officer Ryan Cole. Identify yourself immediately. This is an immediate technical retrieval order." The entire maintenance crew, the junior engineers, and even the executive board froze in place. The chaos surrounding the failing VIP jet was instantly overshadowed by the overwhelming authoritative presence of the U.S. Navy. The question was no longer if the plane was fixed, but why the military was here. Helena Brooks stood utterly paralyzed next to the massive vibrating jet. She stared at the commander, then frantically turned to look at the personnel roster still sitting on the abandoned desk. Her mind was a torrent of panicked calculations. Chief Petty Officer? She had just fired the man the Navy was actively hunting for. The officer approached the stunned Iron Gate security chief. He didn't ask permission. He presented a single, sealed document with a stern expression. This is an emergency order for immediate technical assistance, routed through the Department of Defense. Your facility is now under temporary, limited military access, under the authority of the Naval Aviation Command. The commander in charge addressed the bewildered crowd, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear the devastating truth. The failure on your Gulfstream buy is directly related to a proprietary component, a legacy auxiliary fuel pressure system that was retrofitted when this aircraft was serviced overseas before being transferred to civilian use. His gaze swept over the Iron Gate team, landing pointedly on Helena. The only personnel in this region with the necessary expertise for this specific legacy system, which requires military-grade calibration tools, is a former Chief Petty Officer assigned to the Naval Aviation Command, Ryan Cole. He continued, his words revealing the profound, embarrassing truth that shattered Brooks' narrative. Furthermore, Chief Cole was not just a mechanic. He was part of the original integration team that designed and field-tested the auxiliary fuel distribution system for this entire fleet variant. His knowledge of its failure modes and precise tolerances is irreplaceable. The officer then explained the unbelievable mechanism of their arrival. When Chief Cole's safety report regarding the pressure relief valve was downgraded and dismissed by the civilian chain of command, the automated system he put in place during his service, a fail-safe designed to prevent catastrophic structural failures in military aircraft, kicked in. The report was automatically escalated and routed to our technical advisory channels. We received the critical warning that your plane was about to suffer a catastrophic, unrecoverable failure. The officer scanned the perimeter again. His eyes landed on the man standing by the fence line with a 9-year-old boy, the quiet, composed figure who had just been humiliated. He pointed directly at Ryan. Chief Cole, you are required to render immediate technical assistance to prevent a major incident. This is not a request. This is a directive from the Naval Command. Helena Brooks could only stand and watch, her meticulously planned corporate world disintegrating. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her professional mask shattered. She tried to speak, to assert her forgotten authority, to offer some pathetic excuse, but no sound came out. She was completely silenced by the truth. Ryan, acknowledging the familiar call of duty that transcended his civilian firing, released Ben's hand. He walked a few hundred yards back to Hangar 6, not as a fired mechanic seeking revenge, but as the only solution to a crisis only he understood. He didn't look at Helena. His focus was absolute, fixed only on the jet. Once inside, ignoring everyone but the commander and the task at hand, Ryan went straight to the fuel bay. He located the failing pressure relief valve, now completely ruptured and leaking vapors. He reached into his old worn toolbox, which he'd carried back, pulling out a specialized micro-calibrated wrench, a tool that was not standard issue for the civilian crew. He pointed at the assembly. The accumulator valve pin is off by 0.5 millimeters on the rotational axis due to the improper patch. The entire temporary fix destabilized the main feed line connection point. Working with the speed and precision of a surgeon, Ryan performed a tiny, almost imperceptible adjustment to the neighboring bypass regulator to temporarily stabilize the pressure, and then, using a military-spec locking collar supplied by the commander, he secured the failing valve. He worked for exactly 30 seconds. The heavy, abnormal vibration that had rattled the massive jet ceased instantly. The engine hummed with clean, powerful stability. The job was done. Ryan stepped back, placing the wrench back in his box. The naval commander, watching the entire exchange, walked up to Ryan. He didn't shake his hand. He executed a crisp, formal salute, a gesture of profound military respect and gratitude. The entire military presence on the tarmac watched the salute in silence, while the Iron Gate crew watched, stunned into awe. The two Seahawks remained on the tarmac, their powerful presence a silent, powerful witness to the events that had just unfolded. The air was thick with the smell of high-octane fuel and the metallic tang of shame. Helena Brooks finally managed to walk toward Ryan, her posture broken, her tailored suit now looking fragile and ridiculous. She stopped directly in front of him, facing the entire assembled staff, knowing that her survival depended on absolute public honesty. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice cracking slightly, devoid of all previous arrogance. "I was wrong. I was profoundly wrong and arrogant. I ignored your expertise, the very skill that built this plane system, and prioritized paperwork and my own ego over safety and the lives of our clients. I publicly apologize to you, to the maintenance crew, and to the Naval Command for dismissing your critical technical warning and for the reckless decision to fire you." She immediately offered restitution, trying desperately to close the massive professional and ethical gap she had created. "I am offering you immediate reinstatement as Chief of Maintenance, effective immediately, with a substantial six-figure bonus to reflect the risks you averted. Furthermore, I guarantee a promotion to Director of Technical Operations within 90 days. Ryan listened patiently. His quiet dignity had returned, solidified not just by the commander's salute, but by the undeniable fact that he had saved the company and potentially a plane crash. He shook his head gently. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Brooks, but I decline the management role. I will not return to a position that requires me to prioritize politics over performance." He counterproposed his true value, the kind of role that truly mattered to him. "I will accept a role as an independent technical safety consultant for Iron Gate Aviation. I will be on a substantial permanent retainer with the flexible hours that allow me to meet my duties as a father." He laid out his non-negotiable term, the single condition that would forever change the power dynamic at Iron Gate. "My authority must be absolute and technical, Ms. Brooks. I must have the unilateral power to ground any aircraft immediately and without a single moment of management input if I detect a catastrophic risk that compromises the integrity of the machine." Helena looked from the two enormous Navy helicopters waiting nearby to the massive jet that had nearly failed. She looked at the relieved yet resolute faces of her employees. She looked at the cost of the near disaster she had created, both financially and personally. She swallowed hard and nodded. "Accepted. Without condition, Mr. Cole. Your final word on safety is the law at Iron Gate." The maintenance crew erupted in cheers and applause, not just for Ryan's financial victory, but for their own newly restored safety margin and the validation of their hands-on work. Several older mechanics walked over, offering quick, mumbled apologies and firm handshakes. They had their true advocate back, a man who valued the machine's truth above all else. Ben stood watching his father. He didn't understand the complex corporate negotiations, but he understood the respect in the eyes of the towering officers and the clapping men. His gaze was pure, silent, and filled with immense pride. The naval commander gave Ryan a final nod of professional respect. "Chief Cole, glad you're on retainer. We'll be in touch." He climbed into his Seahawk and, with a ground-shaking roar, the two military birds lifted off, banking sharply toward the coast, their sound receding into the distance. The powerful wind subsided, and the airfield settled back into a quiet normalcy. A normalcy fundamentally changed forever by the 10 minutes of military intervention. Ryan walked back to the bench where he had left Ben. He placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder. He took a long, quiet breath, the professional tension of the morning finally easing out of his muscles. He smiled down at his son. He had walked out fired and walked back in an independent authority, his worth confirmed not by a corporate badge, but by the necessity of his knowledge. In the immediate weeks that followed, Iron Gate Aviation underwent a massive, publicized overhaul of its safety protocols. The technical reporting structure was inverted. The hands-on findings of a senior mechanic were given equal, if not greater weight, than the digital reports generated by automated systems. The company instituted Ryan's gut check protocol, requiring a final human-signed inspection that prioritized experience over compliance checks. The old destructive mentality of the grunt mechanic versus the degreed engineer was banished from the floor. Every single mechanic's initial report now automatically generated a Level 1 safety hold until personally cleared by Ryan Cole or a certified consultant. The pressure on the frontline staff was dramatically reduced. The ultimate burden of safety now lay with the expert. Ryan, true to his word, worked flexible hours, dedicating his time primarily to high-risk inspections and specialized troubleshooting, the work he loved best. He never missed a single school pickup, always greeting Ben at the gate exactly on time, his personal schedule finally matching his professional one. At school, when asked what his father did, Ben's explanation, delivered with the quiet authority of a child who knows a profound truth, was simple and definitive. My dad saved an airplane from crashing. The Navy came to get him because he was the only one who could hear it talking. When Ben recounted this to Ryan, Ryan would chuckle softly, embracing his son. I don't save the airplane, Ben. I just listen to what it's trying to tell us. It's important to always listen to the quiet warnings. Helena Brooks, humbled and thoroughly chastened, remained as CEO, but her management style was radically transformed. The incident served as a powerful, permanent lesson. She learned to pause, listen, and actively seek dissenting technical input from the floor before making executive decisions. She stopped seeing mechanics as interchangeable cogs and started recognizing them as the foundational, irreplaceable experts of the company's safety and, by extension, its profitability. The culture of fear evaporated, replaced by one of trust. There were no more firings to conceal corporate pressure or poor planning. The integrity of the maintenance process became the company's most valuable, non-negotiable asset. Ryan Cole didn't need the title of director or chief on his badge anymore. His authority was self-evident, earned by his hands, his integrity, and validated by the emergency descent of 2 military helicopters. He had achieved the highest level of respect, based purely on his expertise and his absolute refusal to compromise the truth of the machine. The junior engineer, Chris, who had first recognized Ryan's original warning, now sought him out constantly, viewing Ryan as the true mentor and model of ethical, professional engineering. The man who would not compromise the truth of the machine, no matter the cost. The late afternoon sun cast long, peaceful shadows across the now quiet runway, a symbol of stability and integrity restored. In the fading light, Ryan and Ben walked out of the Iron Gate complex gate hand in hand. Ryan carried his old toolbox, no longer as a symbol of dismissal, but as the trusted, necessary instrument of his unique power. The true guardians of safety and integrity can never be permanently dismissed. They are simply waiting for the moment their essential value is recognized by the world, often returning at the exact moment of greatest crisis. If you believe stories of true earned expertise and dignity restored deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to Kind Single Father.